I'm Alex Morash, and let's queer up politics. Biden-era protections for LGBT in the workplace scrapped by Trump administration. On Thursday, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission scrapped 2024 guidelines that declared harassment of workers due to having had abortions or transgender identities unlawful workplace discrimination. Since President Trump started his second term last year, the EEOC has stopped pursuing complaints filed by transgender employees and has launched probes into workplace diversity policies. In a joint statement issued before the vote, a dozen former EEOC and U.S. Department of Labor officials said, quote, "This action is likely to increase the amount of harassment that occurs in workplaces across the country," end quote. The Trump-appointed EEOC Chair, Andrea Lucas, said ahead of the vote that the EEOC had overstepped its authority by issuing guidelines beyond protections created by the law. Now, this is something that, in my work, I deal with like the different progressive coalitions that deal with the EEOC, and they've been pulling back a lot of the LGBTQ protection in the last couple of weeks. And what's odd is, these people, they'll make up that, this is not in the law. The Biden administration started doing some of this stuff after the Supreme Court cases during its term, protecting trans and LGBTQ identities in general. So this is just absolutely bizarro land stuff. But, I always remind people, when it comes to discrimination, whether it be race, sexual orientation, gender, abortion, protection, anything, the best workplace protections is the union, because you need someone on your side to help you, because the enforcement of these laws has always been very hard, and if you don't have your own advocate, the company has HR as an advocate and their lawyers. You need your own advocate, and a union's the most simplest way to do that, unless you want to always have a lawyer on retainer, which I'm sure we all do.
Oh yeah, of course, in my back pocket, right?
Yeah.
Well, folks, rolling back protections doesn't make harassment disappear. It gives it permission, unfortunately, And when the government stops defending trans workers and people who've had abortions, workplaces don't get neutral. They get hostile, and they get hostile quick. I don't know if you boys have worked in an office, but when you work in that kind of environment, it's got all the ingredients to blow up when it comes to when, and this is exactly what this is all about.
I've heard some toxic stories about that. I was fortunate because I was working with JP Morgan and Morgan Stanley. So we've had DEI initiatives from the early 2000s. And so it was such a blessing to work for those type of organizations. But there are definitely, even newspapers in New York that, also have different types of, that they're eliminating a lot of these DEIs and just doing away with them and just kind of skirting it putting it under the rug, more or less, and it's disappearing. And it's alarming because, you wonder what kind of a culture you're creating at this point, or what you're evoking.
Exactly, but these protections are first and foremost to protect you from your employer even more than other staff.
Right.
There are harassment issues that do happen in the workplace, obviously, but the employer is the one that has to enforce that. So when an employer does their own diversity or non-discrimination policy, they're the ones setting it, which gives them a lot of extra power, and they're the one that we're the most worried about with abuse. The Center for American Progress about 2017 released a study of LGBTQ people in the workplace. The number of different ways that we as a community hide our sexual orientation or our gender identity at work to avoid the issues of being discriminated in hiring or in a promotion is just absolutely so profound and common. I've dealt with it so many times in my work. I know, as a white boy, I get a certain amount of protection, but at the end of the day, once rumor has it people can figure out I'm queer very quickly, and there are plenty of people that instantly see me, they will not take me seriously professionally. I'm used to that my whole life.
And that sucks that you had to do that. My first radio job, I was the straight girl next door, and I screamed and said, "I'm not the straight girl next door. Please don't make me into this." And they're like, "You want this job or not?"
Exactly.
Right? And what are you going to do when you're put in that kind of situation? It's your, one of your first radio
bread
jobs.
And butter, more or less. Yeah. Sometimes you have to adapt to it.
We've seen this happening where, and when I see stories like this, I think about the smaller percentages of identities that they've gone after, not just in this case, but it's trickling into everything. Because if they start knocking down the smaller percentages, it builds a case for then getting to the larger percentages. And I think that what's next, women? What's next?
Well,
really?
or even opposite. You know, Vaughn. I mean, Alex is a white male, right? I'm more worried for my trans siblings that are having to go to work and deal with the asshole that's you know that is anti-trans.
Exactly.
Works at this workplace, and when he got there, DEI was existed, and now it doesn't.
Right.
But to Vaughn's point, I remember when I was at the National LGBTQ Task Force, there was the big wedding cake case. Remember that one? And the ACLU had internal memos that they were giving everyone. Their biggest fear with this sort of stuff and with the Alliance Defending Freedom's legal cases, their goal is to outlaw all non-discrimination laws that don't protect Christians. Like, that is their actual end game.
Yeah. Yeah, so, and women would fall right under
women, non-white people, queer,
everybody
trans,
who's not a
everybody who's not a white
straight
old
guy.
man who's Christian with money. Like, a very specific group they want to protect.
Wow, isn't that crazy? And that's nobody at this table. Like, I mean, wow. There is no other queer nonprofit media platform like this in the entire world. Support our LGBTQ stories by sharing them and subscribing to Queer News Tonight.